Hello, everyone. I want to talk a little bit about the founders, their view of democracy, and their view of, especially of the nature of republics. The founders were very learned men. They had studied ancient Greece, ancient Rome. They read history of the British kingdoms and of the history of the Roman republics. And what they all came to them is the fear of republics themselves. Republics are elected governments like the United States would become, which all failed because of factional infighting. Factions are different perspectives and views which could lead to intrigue, which could be corrupted because the men running them at the time were not virtuous, were not putting their interests above passion. And so they thought that the best form of government would be one in which limited government was possible, but only by a select few people. Democracy in America would grow out of this experience and would grow more and more through the 19th century to bring in more people into the American governing experience, especially white male property owners initially, and then poor whites and others, before finally in the 20th century, women and then African Americans receive the vote and other minorities are protected. And we have a philosophy of one man, one vote. Why did the founders disdain politics and factions so much? They saw that their experience as colonists within the British Empire saw that political faction was a threat to liberty, and that liberty was the crucial thing altogether to protect, and only virtuous men could protect it. So the founders were really interested in establishing a republic, not a democracy. That's important to know. The heritage of North America under the British colonies allowed for this to happen. So here's a map of the British colonies, who were allowed to kind of grow themselves and develop themselves, particularly in a period from 1713 to 1763, when the British were mainly engaged in European wars, and the Americans, who had established themselves as British subjects, ruled their own affairs. Now, they had always done this from the start. When Massachusetts is first settled, the Massachusetts Bay Colony, which was a private colony, establishes town hall meetings and establishes a legislature to rule its own affairs. In Virginia, you had the oldest legislature established in the colonies being the House of Burgesses. So the colonists had always governed themselves, and when the British tried to clamp down on this following the French and Indian War, that leads to the American Revolution. Here are just a couple pictures of the British House, the Virginia House of Burgesses on the left, and a very much a town hall meeting engaged in some of these disputes in New England. There were no political parties in the Revolutionary era. Those who supported the Revolution, the liberties of Englishmen, were called Whigs, or the country faction, and those who supported the crown were called Tories, or the city faction, because of the interests of London. Very few politicians in England supported the colonial cause, but one of them, an Anglo-Irish statesman by the name of Edmund Burke, did. The Whigs were supported by the inheritance of the British Constitution, which was not written down, and so the founders wanted to make sure that the American Constitution would be a written constitution that could guarantee the rights of government, and eventually the Bill of Rights would be added to that to guarantee the rights of individual Americans. It was also based on common law, and ancient and contemporary philosophers contributed to this as well. And the Americans were influenced heavily by philosophers from England like Adam Smith, David Hume, and the philosopher John Locke. And this Republican thought, as it was called, weighed heavily on the Revolution generation, as did the knowledge that they had from ancient Greece and Rome. So when they set out to create a constitution, the founders didn't talk about politics in it. There was no mention of politics. There are no mentions of political parties whatsoever. And most of the founders were disdainful of the idea that a republic could be established in America since it was such a big country. Alexander Hamilton, laid this out in what was called the Federalist Paper number 9, which said that the republic the size of the United States would be in jeopardy because of its size, that factions would grow, different interests would challenge things, and that the country would never have unity. James Madison, who wrote the Constitution and would write most of the Bill of Rights as well, cast doubt on this theory. Factions were not harmful to liberty and individual rights, as they were part of human nature. Rather, the pursuit of different interests in a wider republic would be beneficial to the nature of the republic. There's a picture of Madison. So at the Constitutional Convention, One could say this is the roots of political parties. There are a lot of compromises there, which maybe other people have talked about. But there was what was clear was that the founders had created a governance and governing organization which was not democratic, that they feared a democracy which could lead to license and be a threat to liberty. They were a republic. They thought that they could survive as a republic, and Madison's kind of constitutional theories in Federalist Paper number 10 showed this. Landed white men could vote, and only one person they could vote for was the representative. The president was elected by an electoral college. Were they unwise to think that politics could develop? Their own experience during the Revolution and afterwards showed them that political factions would develop. But during the period after the Constitution was adopted,